This video is a slideshow summary of our 2021 van life vacation, which occurred from June 26th to August 8th in 2021. On this trip, which lasted 44 days, we covered 22 states and 12,409 miles, visiting 11 national parks and numerous other national park units. In 2018, we bought ourselves a Dodge ProMaster conversion van. And in 2019, I took this van out to Idaho for 23 days on a trip by myself. 2020, of course, the pandemic hit, so we were only able to get away for a week in West Virginia with the van. And now we're trying to make up for lost ground here in 2021. So the first 3 weeks of this trip, I was by myself in the van. And then my wife and daughter flew out to San Francisco and met there, and we spent a week together in Yosemite National Park. My daughter flew home, and then my wife spent the remaining time driving back with me. So my first stop on June 26th was at McConnells Mill State Park, which is just north of Pittsburgh. So I left Lancaster around 6:45 in the morning, and I drove west on the Pennsylvania Turnpike to McConnells Mill. This is a grist mill that was built in 1875 by Thomas McConnell. It processed wheat, corn, and oats. There's also a covered bridge there that was built in 1874 using the Howe Truss design. I then continued westward to East Harbor State Park in Sandusky, Ohio, where I swam in Lake Erie, cooked a tinfoil meal, and went to see the Marblehead Lighthouse. I also captured this beautiful photograph of a blue heron on some driftwood in the lake at sunset, driving 487 miles on my first day. On June 27th, it was overcast in the morning. I drove to Michigan, to the western side of Michigan, and headed north to Saugatuck Sand Dunes, a state park there, where I did a short hike to the sand dunes. Then I drove north to Sleeping Dunes National Lake Shore, but it was unfortunately too foggy to get any pictures there. Day two, I covered 476 miles. On June 28th, I drove about an hour in the morning to the ferry, and I took the 9 a.m. ferry to Mackinac Island. Mackinac Island is an island that separates the lower part of Michigan from the upper peninsula of Michigan. And the only way to get there is by ferry. And on the island there are no cars. It only has horse and drawn carriages and bicycles, and you can of course walk on foot. I walked on the trail to Arch Rock, a Mackinac Island State Park. There's also a fort there. And the island is known for its fudge, so of course I had to get some fudge before taking the 12:30 ferry back to the mainland. Then I crossed over the 5-mile bridge to the upper peninsula of Michigan and drove on to Tahquamenon Falls State Park. At this state park, there's two sets of falls, the upper falls, which is pictured here, and the lower falls, which is actually a series of 5 different cascades. I stayed overnight in the Tahquamenon Falls State Park campground, covering 218 miles today. On June 29th, I get up and I drove to Pictured Rocks National Lakeshore, entering on the eastern side and seeing Sable Falls, and then the log slide of the Grand Sand Dunes, and then Miner's Castle, which is this rock formation here along the edge of the lake. And then I took a hike to Miners Falls and Munising Falls. When I was hiking to these falls, I met someone whose name was Karma. Hopefully I met the good Karma. It turns out Karma was also going to be on the Pictured Rocks, the same Pictured Rocks scenic cruise to Spray Falls in the evening as I was, and also the next day was going to be taking the Apostle Islands scenic cruise at sunset, the same exact cruise that I was taking. So a little bit of irony there. So I got to befriend Karma, and we sat together on the Pictured Rocks cruise. This is a photo of an old fishing village. This is an example of why it's called Pictured Rocks. You see the beautiful colors here along the edge of the lake shore. This is an old lighthouse. This is called Lover's Leap. And as the cruise went on, it started to rain a little bit. And we got to our terminal point there at Spray Falls and then returned to our origin. I boondocked in the Hiawatha National Forest. This is my first boondocking experience on this particular trip. I just found the road in the forest, a forest road, and took a little pull off there in the middle of nowhere, and only 2 cars went by the whole night. Covered 179 miles today. On June the 30th, I get up early and I drove way far to the northwestern corner of Michigan to the Porcupine Mountain State Park, where there is the Lake of the Clouds. You can actually walk right up to Lake of the Clouds. And then there is a hike that gave you an overview of the entire area. And in the Presque Isle Scenic area, there were 3 waterfalls that you could see. I drove from there to the Apostle Islands in Wisconsin, where I met up with Karma again for the sunset cruise at 5:30. The weather was absolutely beautiful for this cruise. As we went out here, you can see there are all these sea caves along the islands and beautiful lighthouse there. Absolutely stunning scenery here. This is the rare time of day where you have actually no shadows on the lighthouse. Covered 329 miles today. On the next day, it was mostly a driving day, so I got up early and I drove from Wisconsin all the way across to the western side of North Dakota, stopping for lunch at Leech Lake. It was a total of 11 and a half hours of solo driving for 595 miles. And then I boondocked, found this boondocking site on iOverlander at the Little Missouri National Grasslands, just outside the entrance to Theodore Roosevelt National Park, about 5 miles away, and slightly up a hill. There was one other camper in the campground when I got there, and had this absolutely beautiful, stunning sunset over the national grasslands. There it is with the van in the foreground, my camp spot. The next day I get up and drove into Theodore Roosevelt National Park. This national park is named after President Theodore Roosevelt, who came here to hunt in 1883. He came to hunt bison. Then he went back east again, and in February 14th, 1884, his wife died giving childbirth, and his mom died of typhoid fever on the very same day. So Roosevelt headed back in 1884 to the area that's now named after him in the North Dakota Badlands here, and he founded the Maltese Cross Ranch. Later he moved into another ranch called the Elkhorn Ranch. Both of these ranches are along the Little Missouri River. Here's a picture of the Maltese Cross cabin that Roosevelt had built. The Theodore Roosevelt National Park consists of 2 units. The southern unit has a lot of prairie dog towns. I also saw deer there, rabbits, wild horses, western bluebird, and bison. Went to Boycourt Overlook, Buck Hill, the Badlands Overlook, and Wing Canyon Trail, as well as the Maltese Cross Cabin. Then I drove 85 miles to the north unit, And in the north unit, you have all these cannonball concretions that are caused by erosion. And I stopped at the River Bend and Oxbow overlooks before returning to the Painted Canyon Visitor Center. A total of 229 miles today. And then another beautiful sunset from my boondocking site in the Little Missouri National Grasslands. On July the 3rd, I drove to Devil's Tower National Monument, and I hiked on the Red Beds Trail in the heat of the day, 101-degree temperatures. This trail circles the entire circumference of Devil's Tower. It was very hot. Lots of prairie dogs around here as well. Then I drove to Wall, South Dakota, where the original Wall drugstore exists, and I made sure to get my 5-cent cup of coffee. Then I drove south to the Big Buffalo National Grasslands Nomad View, which is a boondocking site in the National Grasslands, just 1 mile outside the entrance to Badlands National Park. This is a famous site amongst van lifers, and it was a van life dream of mine to be able to camp here. So you're actually camping along this ridge overlooking a portion of the Badlands. This is the view from my campsite. Absolutely stunning view. Drove 438 miles today. On July 4th, Independence Day, I made sure to get up really early to see the sunrise from my boondocking site. Absolutely beautiful. And as they say, the early bird gets the worm. As I entered the Badlands National Park, there were tons of prairie dogs out, lots of bighorn sheep right along the road. This one has a radio collar on it. And you can see these sheep high up here on the cliff sides. Early morning lighting, nobody around, cooler part of the day. Absolutely the best advice ever is to get up early and do your sightseeing before other people are out there. Some stunning views of the Badlands from the Badlands Loop Road heading east. And then I stopped to do the Notch Trail hike, a 1.65 mile hike where you have to climb up the side of a cliff on this wooden ladder, and then there are some steep drop-offs, and eventually you open up to this gorgeous view. In the middle part of the day, then I made a detour to the Minuteman Missile National Historic Site, where you can drive out to the Delta 01 missile site and actually see a decommissioned ICBM in its missile silo. They built these missile silos out in the middle of nowhere so that in case Russia wanted, or the Soviet Union wanted to take them out, they wouldn't take out a lot of civilians at the same time. I drove back to the Badlands, and it was really, really hot, so I took a nap because I was up early. I took a nap in the back of the van, and then I drove the Badlands Loop Road back in a westward direction and saw this wonderful bighorn sheep also taking a nap in the middle of the day. And stopped at the Yellow Mounds overlook here. And then went back to my campsite for another sunset from my Nomad View boondocking site. Covered only 76 miles today. July the 5th, I got up and drove to Custer State Park. I did the wildlife loop, but the only wildlife I saw on the wildlife loop was pronghorn antelope. Usually people see lots of bison here. I did not see any bison at all. Then I went on the Needles Highway. The Needles Highway has these very interesting rock formations. And this one's called Needles Eye. And right near Needles Eye here is a tunnel that is only 8 foot 4 inches wide. So it was fun to watch the cars try to navigate their way through the tunnel. My van is exactly 8 foot 4 inches wide, so I was not going to make it through. So I did a U-turn there and drove back to Sylvan Lake here. And then I headed south to Mount Rushmore National Memorial. capturing George Washington's profile here. I think that Mount Rushmore is incredibly commercialized here. It's free, of course, to get in with your National Park Pass, but you have to pay $5 to park. And then as you go up the steps, they have this grand entry with all the flags from all the different states. And it gets very crowded and bustling with activity. And of course, this is COVID times. There are people not wearing their masks and just all over the place. So I took the little side presidential trail, a little less crowded here. It was very hot, of course, and got some better views of the presidents. Then I got back in the car and I headed southeast. And I was just following my Google Maps here, and my Google Maps took me all over the middle of God's creation. In the middle of nowhere in Nebraska, I'm on these dirt roads for like 50 miles. There's a thunderstorm in the distance, and I'm just skirting the edge of the thunderstorm. And finally I arrive at Agate Fossil Beds National Monument. Which is a national monument because of its early mammal fossils. They also have a very nice Native American collection in the museum there. Many of these early mammal fossils are found and are currently found in the Carnegie Museum in Pittsburgh. This is what's called a Demoneolix. It's a burrow of a giant gopher that was called a Paleocastor. So what happened here at the Agate Fossil Beds National Monument, it was like a waterhole, like in the Serengeti Plains, and it would flood occasionally, and then all the animals would come here to drink, and then the waterhole would dry up, and the animals would be stuck there, and they'd have to eat around the perimeter of the waterhole, and eventually they'd eat all the food there until it was all gone, and then they'd die, and they became fossilized. I stayed at a wonderful campground here called the Riverside Campground for only $10, right in the shadow of Scotts Bluff National Monument, which was the first thing I went to see on July the 6th. Got there right as it opened. This is Scotts Bluff. It was a landmark to many peoples, the Native Americans, to people traveling west on the Oregon Trail. In fact, here's a portion of the original Oregon Trail, and then you can drive up through several tunnels to the top for some nice views. This is one of the early pioneers, Rebecca Winters. Like many of the pioneers, she died of cholera on the path out to Oregon, and her husband decided to take a wagon wheel here and inscribe her name in it and put that at her burial site. You can still see that burial site today. Then I went a little further south to Chimney Rock State Park, aptly named here. As you can tell, it looks like a chimney. And then I drove farther south to Colorado to Rocky Mountain National Park. Now this year, Rocky Mountain National Park requires time passes. You need to have a day pass to get in up until 3 p.m. So I got there around 3:15. There was a long line of cars to get in. I didn't need a day pass then, but there was so much traffic on Trail Ridge Road that there was no place to pull over. I finally was able to turn around that rainbow curve, but I was only able to get a few pictures out the window as I was driving. Absolutely terrible experience. I hope that the parks become a little less crowded in the future. I drove from Rocky Mountain National Park then down to Boulder, Colorado, where I stayed with one of my students, Charlie, one of my former students, a good buddy of mine, and I stayed in his driveway in Boulder. Charlie took 2 days vacation and spent the next 2 days with me. We went hiking. So on the first day, we drove to somewhere near Winter Park, Colorado, to Mount Flora. Mount Flora is already at 10,000 foot of elevation, and it's on the Continental Divide Trail. We did a 6.4 mile hike above the tree line at this high elevation. Let me tell you, I was sucking wind. It was not an easy hike for me. I was not used to the elevation, but absolutely stunning views here. There's a picture of Charlie taking a water break. And once you got down to the area where there was vegetation, the flowers were so incredible. It was like you were on the mountaintop, and the sound of music. The hills are alive. Oh, then we spent the afternoon cooling off in Dillon Lake in Frisco, Colorado. Frigid cold waters, but it really felt good after that long hike, especially on the tired legs. And we boondocked at the White River National Forest near Breckenridge. This is Charlie cooking us some dinner. And the view from our campsite. Charlie camped in the tent in the front of the van. I stayed in the van. Charlie didn't get any sleep because he heard the coyotes howling all night. Next morning we made some pancakes and then we drove to Copper Mountain, Colorado, where we did a 6.6 mile hike to Wheeler Lake. Again, I was sucking wind to the point where Charlie says, "You know what's not going to get us there any faster? You complaining." But it was a rough climb for me. Absolutely beautiful wildflowers. So this is not quite as high elevation, so you're not above tree line here. Lots of meadows of beautiful wildflowers. And then you get to these two very small lakes that are called Wheeler Lakes. Charlie was fascinated by this creature, an amphibian in the lakes that's an axolotl, which he had studied in his biology class back at Ursinus. We also saw a black fox on this trail. Nice aspen grove of trees here. And then we had to drive over Loveland Pass to get back to Boulder, Colorado, with a quick dip again in Dillon Lake. So then I left Charlie, and I was still in the Boulder area. Decided I was going to stay there for another day. Got very hot. I went to Chautauqua Park and did the Flatirons Loop. The Flatiron Mountains are the mountains that surround Boulder. Then I drove to Boulder Falls and a little bit farther west to the town of Nederland and this Barter Reservoir. While I was there, there was a woman that was stocking fish, trout, into the lake. Nederland also has a very quaint mining museum and the Carousel of Happiness. It was way too hot to boondock in the Boulder area, so I decided to head north to Wyoming and boondock in the Medicine Bow National Forest near Vedawoo rock climbing area. Went and explored that the next morning and did the Turtle Rock Trail around Vedawoo. You can see why people like to go rock climbing here. And then in the Medicine Bow National Forest, which is so beautiful that it should actually be a national park, I went to Libby Lake and the Snowy Range Scenic Area. Some beautiful columbine here. Mirror Lake. At Mirror Lake, I was stumbled upon two people that had just gotten engaged and were so happy to show me their engagement ring and wanted me to join them for a picnic and take pictures of them and stuff. Then I drove to Flaming Gorge National Recreation Area, where I drove down a 7-mile dirt road called Jug Hollow Road and boondocked right here by the water. 337 miles covered today. July the 11th, went to Flaming Gorge National Recreation Area. There's a dam there that you can see. And then Red Canyon Visitor Center, and I drove on the Sheep Creek Geological Loop, which is kind of like a little bit like Zion National Park. You're down in the canyon as you're driving through. And then I ended my day at Deer Creek State Park in Utah, 264 miles. July the 12th, I drove to Timpanagos Cave National Monument. This is an interesting place. You have to hike up 1,060 feet elevation gain, 1.5 mile hike up the mountain to get to the cave tour. Then you have a cave tour. It's actually 3 tours. It was an hour-long tour. The first cave is Hansen Cave, discovered in 1887 by Martin Hansen when he followed mountain lion tracks in the snow into the cave. The middle cave, which was discovered in 1921 by his son and grandson. And then finally, Timpanagos Cave, discovered in 1915 by 2 teenagers. The 3 caves are currently connected using man-made tunnels. You can tour them. This is the view as you're hiking up the hill to the caves. Some little cave bacon inside the cave. This is called the Great Heart of Timpanagos. And here are some of the formations for which the cave is famous, called helictites. It was 47 degrees in the cave. Then I drove to Antelope Island State Park on the Great Salt Lake, where it was 105 degrees. Saw these bison and the Fielding Gar Ranch, which is like a living history museum. You can look in the old home here and the workshop. Then I went to Ladyfinger Point and captured an amazing sunset over the Great Salt Lake. Camped in the campground there on Antelope Island. 138 miles. July the 13th, I drove to the Bonneville Salt Flats. Another van life dream of mine. So this is where the land speed record for car racing was set in Utah, driving on these salt flats here. You can just take a rest area, drive off the macadam right onto the salt. It's incredibly hot. I had my tripod set up, my phone camera overheated almost immediately. It was 103 degrees, but I got this amazing picture of the van on the salt flats. A van life dream of mine. Then I drove west on I-80, and I just drove until I got tired and pulled over at Rye Patch Reservoir, BLM land, Bureau of Land Management. Drove back a dirt road about 5 miles. I was all alone back here in this beautiful camp spot. Watched the sun go down. Took a picture of the van there. 457 miles. July the 14th, I got up. I was in the middle of nowhere, so I just showered outside the van. And I drove to Lake Tahoe. Did the East Side Trail to Hidden Beach. Dipped my toes in the crystal clear water. Then I drove around the west side to D.L. Bliss State Park and hiked along the Rubicon Trail. There's a little lighthouse there. And I camped at the Emerald Bay State Park. July 15th, got up for sunrise over Lake Tahoe. Then I drove to the Napa Valley on the Silverado Trail, went to the Beringer Estate and the Castillo de Amorosa Estate, where you have to pay either $65 for a wine tasting to see this castle, or you can buy 3 bottles of wine. I chose the latter. After a day in the Napa Valley, I drove to Oakland, California, where I stayed with one of my Instagram friends who I'd never met before, named Gina. 276 miles. On July the 16th, I drove on the Pacific Coast Highway to Pacifica and Half Moon Bay, Pigeon Point Lighthouse, and then saw the elephant seals on a 4-mile round trip hike to Ano Nuevo, and then back to Oakland to stay with Gina one more night in her driveway. July 17th, I drove to the San Francisco International Airport, picked up Jessica and Rachel, and after some food shopping, we drove all the way to El Portal, California, just outside Yosemite National Park, where we stayed in the hotel. On July the 18th, we went into Yosemite National Park, drove on Tioga Road to Tuolumne Meadows, stopping at Olmsted Point here to see Half Dome from the backside, and Tenaya Lake. And then Rachel had her 3rd ever rock climbing lesson in Yosemite National Park in the Tuolumne Meadows area. That's her climbing a pitch. And one of her buddies belaying. While she was climbing, Jessica and I hiked on the John Muir Trail. We did a 5.1 mile hike to Lembert Dome, which I summited. It's the view from near the summit. And then we stayed in the same hotel that night. July 19th, we drove back into the valley and we got our backpacking permits. Went to Glacier Point. Here's Tunnel View. Now we're at Glacier Point. There's Nevada and Vernal Falls. Half Dome. So we're going to climb Half Dome. We're going to start down in the valley at Happy Isles, climb up past Vernal Falls, then past Nevada Falls, then around the back of Half Dome and up the back on the cables. This is the Yosemite Valley. Started to get cloudy while we were at Glacier Point, and then as we were driving through Wawona, it actually downpoured, a very rare summer thunderstorm. And then we went to Mariposa Grove, where we hiked 5.2 miles round trip to see some redwood trees and sequoia trees there in the grove. We stayed in another hotel, a different hotel in El Portal, just outside Yosemite National Park. Now the next day we were supposed to begin our backpacking trip. It was supposed to be a 3-day backpacking trip, but Jessica decided that, and I agree this is a genius idea, that we should only do it in 2 days. So instead we just cooled off in the Merced River by El Capitan in the Yosemite Valley. Walked around, the girls did some reading. I went to check out the Ahwahnee Hotel. And then as I was going to check out Lower Yosemite Falls, I tripped and scraped my knee open pretty good the day before our Half Dome hike. Now because we had not planned this, we were supposed to be backpacking, we didn't have a place to stay this night, so we actually boondocked together, all 3 of us, in the van in the hotel parking lot, kind of stealth camping. July the 21st, the beginning of our Half Dome hike. So we started getting up at 3:30 in the morning, and we were on the trail at Happy Isles at 4:30 to see the Milky Way. It was so dark out. So we hiked up past Vernal Falls footbridge with our headlamps on. And then up the John Muir Trail until we reached Nevada Falls. At Nevada Falls here, we filled our water bottles and we had an early lunch. It was probably only around 10 a.m. at the time, maybe even earlier. Yeah, it was even earlier than 10 a.m. And we cooked some lunch with our jet boil. And then we continued on until we were at the Little Yosemite Valley backpacking campsite. We set up our tent there. It was around 10 o'clock when we set up our tent there. We covered 6.1 miles on the hike up and a huge elevation gain. Tried to beat the heat that day, but it was hot and there was hardly any shade around there. Only place to sit on was logs. Rachel was smart, brought her hammock, and we went down to the water and cooled off a little bit, but it was just a boring hot afternoon. Got some good shut-eye, and then at 3:30 on summit day, we got up and hit the trail by 4 o'clock. I was struggling in the early morning hours with my water pack on the back, and I just couldn't keep up with the 2 girls. I was whining, complaining a little too much for them. Jessica even took my pack after a while, had some blood pressure issues. But then, as usual, I warmed up to the hike and we watched the sun rise at the subdome. Subdome is this very steep steps that occur before you get to the cables, and this is at the top of the subdome. You can see how steep and scary this is to climb up, the rock scramble at the top. And then we rested a little bit right here at this spot, and it was around 7 a.m. There were maybe 6 other people up there. The ranger wasn't there to collect our permit yet, And the cables here go up the back side of Half Dome. You can see there's two sets of cables with poles connecting them, and then little wooden slabs in between to kind of act as stairs. The stairs are maybe spaced 10 to 20 feet apart from each other, and there's about 64 of them as you go up this 45-degree pitch. You can see how steep this actually looks here. So basically you're pulling yourself up using your arms. Okay? It took us about a little over a half hour to get to the top. I went up first. This is me at the summit. And views of the Yosemite Valley from the top of Half Dome. So this is actually a promise that Jessica made to Rachel before she started college, is that after she graduated, they would stand together on the top of Half Dome. It seemed to be an impossible promise because, you know, we're in our 50s now, and this is no small physical feat to be able to climb Half Dome. But they did it. I was so proud of them. It was me sitting on the ledge. All three of us, me and Rachel together. But then, of course, you have to go back down. So after about an hour on the top, as more and more people are starting to arrive and they're starting to come up the cables as you're going down the cables, you have to go back down the cables, which is not easy. I decided to go down backwards so that I didn't have to look forward and see the scary heights. I went down backwards and held myself back with my calves and my arms. These are some views from the subdome now that the sun is up more. And as we hiked back to our Little Yosemite Valley backpacking campsite, where we collected our belongings, put our backpacks back on again, and then had to hike down. We chose to go down the Mist Trail instead of the John Muir Trail. It's a lot steeper, but it's a little bit shorter. It took just as long because it was so steep and slippery that it was dangerous. But the nice thing about the Mist Trail is you get to pass by the waterfalls. So we passed by the waterfalls. This is actually vernal falls here. The waterfalls are fairly dried up by the time the summer gets along, like this far along. There's vernal falls from the Vernal Falls footbridge, and then back to Happy Isles. 13.0 miles of hiking today, and we stayed in a hotel in El Portal and had a nice solid dinner there. Up again on July 23rd for the third straight day, very early, to drive Rachel to San Francisco International Airport for her flight home. Jessica then stayed on with me for the remainder of the trip. Jessica and I drove to Monterey and then down the Pacific Coast Highway to Big Sur. Famous picture of Bixby Bridge here. And we went as far south as Julia Pfeiffer Burns State Park, where we saw McWay Falls here. The falls at high tide actually fall directly into the Pacific Ocean. Here we're at low tide and they're just landing on the beach. You can see the falls better in this photo. And then we drove north and stayed at a hotel in Marina, California. On July the 24th, as we're working our way back towards San Francisco, we had to take a stop at Vasona County Park in Los Gatos for some lunch. A very nice park on a lake here. Lots of different picnickers, cool vibe, people on bikes and scooters, a little model railroad there. Lots of eucalyptus trees with their beautiful fragrant scent. This old couple feeding ducks by the lake. It was a nice stop. Then we drove to San Francisco where it was cloudy, and we went to Baker Beach for this view of the Golden Gate Bridge. And then we tried to find a parking spot downtown and walked to Fisherman's Wharf. Checked out the completely different vibe there. Got some food, saw the Ghirardelli Chocolate Factory and Alcatraz, and then drove to the to a hotel at the airport where Expedia had lost our reservation. So we spent the next hour on the phone and arguing with management to try to get ourselves a room in the hotel. July 25th, back to Vanlife. Went to Battery Point to see the Golden Gate Bridge. And we walked halfway across. We walked to that first span there. And then we went to Crissy Field for a little farther vantage point. Crossed over the bridge in the van and went to Battery Spencer for this view back across with the city in the hinterground. On this side of the bay is the town of Sausalito. So while it was foggy up there in the Marin Headlands, it was beautiful and sunny in Sausalito. We got ourselves lunch at this nice bar/restaurant right on the bay. Had ourselves some crab cakes, lovely dessert, a lemonade, and just took in the scenery. We had to kill some time before traveling to Muir Woods National Monument, where we had a reservation for a parking space. Yes, a $35 parking space for 1 hour and 30 minutes to park from 2 to 3:30, or actually 3:45, at Muir Woods National Monument. Muir Woods is just north of San Francisco, and it's a redwood grove of trees. And when you walk in here on the boardwalk, despite the crowds, it is like going into God's cathedral. These redwood trees just tower up on both sides of you, and it's absolutely awe-inspiring. Dizzying heights. Tallest trees in the world, the redwood trees. Then we drove up the coast to Point Reyes National Seashore. Very long, windy, slow, agonizing drive. This is a cypress tree. And it got cloudy again, bad weather. This is the Point Reyes Lighthouse. And then we drove farther north to a pullout on the highway near Jenner, California, covering 151 miles today. July the 26th, we wake up at our boondocking spot and we look out and we see all these elephant seals out there barking in the morning while we're having our breakfast. Back to Vanlife. Let me tell you, I love Vanlife. Free campsite. This is our view from our free campsite. We drove up the Pacific Coast Highway north of San Francisco to Fort Ross State Park. Fort Ross was founded by Russians and Alaskans that did seal hunting in this area as an outpost. There's a nice lighthouse nearby. And then we went to the Mendocino Headlands State Park. Didn't look like much from the parking lot or the road, but once you get out and just do a little bit of walking around, absolutely stunning coastal scenery. Flowers, arches. Very impressive. Then we went to Russian Gulch State Park. This is like a sinkhole here called Devil's Punch Bowl that sloshes around when the tides come in. A nice suspension bridge there at Russian Gulch State Park. And then we drove farther north to Fort Bragg and Glass Beach, where people are going around the beach looking for these well-polished stones on the beach that look like glass. Continuing up the Pacific Coast Highway, we went to Humboldt Redwood State Park. So this is just like Muir Woods, lots of redwoods in a grove, except this time you can drive right through the grove with the trees right on either side of the narrow road. Very, very impressive. The Humboldt Redwood State Park is actually more beautiful than Redwoods National Park. I highly recommend going there. And then we boondocked on a Highway 101 Vista Point, 225 miles. On July 27th, we continued up the coast, seeing a herd of elk along the road. to Redwood National Park and State Park. The redwood trees get most of their moisture from the mist, and there was lots of mist today. Therefore, there is kind of a temperate rainforest climate here. And then we continued up the coast to the Oregon coast, went to Pebble Beach, Harris Beach State Park. I like how people use the driftwood to build forts. And then eventually to the Samuel Boardman Scenic Corridor, which is absolutely stunning scenery. This is at Arch Rock there in Samuel Boardman Scenic Corridor. I really like this photo a lot. And this is our boondocking site, only 1 mile north of Arch Rock. We set up here, we're the only ones here, and then we decided after dinner to go back to Arch Rock for sunset. Best decision ever. Look at these stunning views of sunset on the Oregon coast over Arch Rock and the Samuel Boardman Scenic area. Scenic indeed. "190 miles. On July 28th, we continued up the Oregon coast to Gold Beach, and then as far north as Bandon. Then we headed inland through the Umpqua National Forest, where they were fighting some forest fires nearby. There were fire camps set up. And we did a short hike to Tahquamenon Falls. Tahquamenon means beautiful. There's a 120-foot drop here. And then Diamond Lake. And we arrived at Crater Lake National Park around 3 in the afternoon. Crater Lake was formed by the eruption of Mount Mazama 7,700 years ago. And you can circle it on a 34-mile road. It gets 560 inches of snow per year, and the water is as deep as 1,800 feet, which is why it appears so blue in color. That's Wizard Island in the middle of the lake. It's a cinder cone. And this is Phantom Ship, a little outcropping from the side. This is called Pumice Castle. Then we hiked down 1.1 miles from the rim on the Cleetwood Cove Trail to the water's edge. And then hiked back up that 1.1 miles, of course. And we captured sunset from Cloud Cap Overlook. And then drove back to our camp at Mazama Campground in the park. 308 miles today. July 29th, got up really early and took these 5:55 a.m. sunrise photos from Watchman Overlook at Crater Lake. One of my favorite pictures on the entire trip is at this sunrise. Then we drove to the Bend, Oregon area, stopping at Newberry National Volcanic Monument and Paulina Falls. And the Big Obsidian Flow. There's some obsidian there, very sharp rock. Native Americans used it to make their arrowheads and as tools. Then we drove to Tumalo Falls and had to park along this dirt road, parallel park on this dirt road, do a 2.3 mile round trip hike to Double Falls and back. Then also in the Bend, Oregon area, we went to Smith Rock State Park, another park that's renowned for its rock climbing. Absolutely stunning scenery here. Unfortunately, it started to cloud up and it was threatening rain. And then finally we drove on to our boondocking site in the Mount Hood National Forest near Trillium Campground, 330 miles today. July the 30th, we got up early and went to Trillium Lake, only a mile from our campground, our free boondocking site. Got the reflections of Mount Hood and Trillium Lake. Then we did a 4.3-mile round trip hike to Mirror Lake. And we paid $10 to go on private property here at Lavender Valley Farms and take pictures of the lavender fields with Mount Hood in the background. Tons of bees, but you could walk in and out of the aisles here and the bees wouldn't bother you at all. Then we drove north to Multnomah Falls in the Columbia River Gorge. Also in the Columbia River Gorge is the Horsetail Falls. And then we went to the Bonneville Dam, and there was a fish hatchery there. This is a fish ladder. And you can see some trout and sturgeon. We then drove on to Portland, where we stayed with my friend, another student of mine from Haverford, named Beth, and her husband Scott, and their son Sam. On July 31st, we said our goodbyes to them, and we drove back to the coast as it was getting hot inland. We went to Ecola State Park, right on the Oregon coast. Has a rainforest type feel to it. This is Indian Beach, where a lot of people are practicing their surfing. See the rainforest area there. Then we went to Neahkahnie Mountain and views of Cannon Beach, classic haystack rock. And then this is at Hug Point State Park, little waterfall there to the right. Continuing up the Oregon coast, we went to Lewis and Clark National Historic Site, Fort Clatsop. So when the Lewis and Clark expedition went west and they eventually got through the Columbia River to the Pacific Ocean, they had to set up a winter camp there. That was Fort Clatsop, and this is the fort. There's a statue to Sacagawea and her son, who helped interpret for them. And this is the canoe landing area. We saw bald eagle here. Then we continued north to the Columbia River, where Oregon and Washington are separated by this bridge. And this is the town of Astoria and the Astoria Column, which you can climb up a spiral staircase, 164 stairs to the top for some views. And then we crossed over the bridge into Washington State. August the 1st, we went up the Olympic Peninsula to Olympic National Park. Went on Beach 3, Beach 4, Ruby Beach, and Rialto Beach. It was very hazy and foggy. Saw a lot of barnacles, sea anemone, but no starfish. Interesting rock formations. This is then in the Hoh Rainforest and the Sausalito River and Lake Crescent. We did a hike to Maramere Falls. Then we drove on Hurricane Ridge. This fawn just came right up off the side of the road. Didn't know I was there. Right next to me. Mountain views from Hurricane Ridge. And then sunset from our boondocking spot right along the highway. On August the 2nd, we drove from Olympic National Park to Mount Rainier. This is Christina Falls. And this is a view of Mount Rainier from Rick Center Point. We went to the Paradise Visitor Center and did the Skyline Trail hike, 4.8 miles, very steep. Got very tired on this hike. But just look at these beautiful wildflowers in the meadows at the foot of Mount Rainier. Doesn't get any better than this. some Indian paintbrush, little yellow-bellied marmot, avalanche lilies, lupine. See the glaciers as we get higher elevation here, and the snowpack even in August. Little snow melt waterfall, more glaciation, beautiful meadows, and then Myrtle Falls here at the base of Mount Rainier. This is Reflection Lake, although there's not much reflection with all the choppy waves. And then we drove on to a budget inn, just trying to cover some ground today. August the 3rd was another driving day. We drove 10.5 hours to Henry's Lake Bureau of Land Management, BLM land. There's our camper with a bunch of others right on Henry's Lake. Henry's Lake is in West Yellowstone, so it's about a half hour from Yellowstone National Park. August the 1st, we drove into the park, and it was very hazy in the morning, probably from the forest fires in California. So we did the Fairy Falls hike. This is about a 5.5 mile round trip hike out to see Fairy Falls, and along the way you can also have views of the Grand Prismatic Spring. Then we went down to hit the highlights and saw Old Faithful erupt at the Yellowstone Lodge. Drove through the Hayden Valley. All those little brown spots you see there are bison. There was a bison jam as cars just backed up trying to take pictures of the bison from the roadside. And we drove to Yellowstone Canyon and Artist Point. And again, it was about to rain on us. So not the greatest pictures of Artist Point. More bison jam on the way back through the Hayden Valley and out the southern entrance of Yellowstone to Grand Teton. We were very disappointed in Grand Teton National Park because the haze was so bad that you couldn't even see the mountains in their beauty. This is sunset from our boondocking site in Shadow Mountain Drive in the Bridger Teton National Forest. August the 5th in the morning, some of the haze had cleared overnight and we got to go to Grand Teton National Park Oxbow Bend here for some reflections before heading out and beginning our long drive back home. We ended at Ogallala State Recreation Area, driving 615 miles. On August the 6th, we continued driving east, mostly on Route 70, 614 miles to Columbia, Missouri, driving through the state of Nebraska, which is home to the Runza sandwich. It's like a pastry wrap with hamburger, spinach, cheese, and onions in it. Had to try that. On August the 7th, we drove a couple hours to St. Louis, Missouri, and the Gateway Arch National Park. When we had been here before in 2010, it was called the Jefferson National Expansion Memorial. It became a national park in 2018. It was built in 1965 from both ends and met at the top in the middle. If it was off by 1 millimeter, they would not have met and it would not be able to stand. It was designed by Eero Saarinen, who beat out his father in a contest for the design, and built at a cost of $13 million. Funded partly by the city and mostly by the federal government. The St. Louis Arch, as it is better known, is actually not an oval. It's a semicircle. It's 630 feet high, the tallest freestanding arch in the world. And it is also 630 feet at its base. It only looks like an oval because we're at ground level looking up at it. Here's a monument to Lewis and Clark and their dog Seaman. And some more views of the arch and the city of St. Louis, the old courthouse. And then we drove across the river to Malcolm Martin State Park for this iconic view of the arch and the town of St. Louis. Continued on to Springfield, Ohio, where we spent the night in a Cracker Barrel parking lot. Second night in a row at Cracker Barrel, covering 513 miles. And then on August the 8th, we left our Cracker Barrel, our cracker docking site in Ohio, and we drove home on Route 70 and the PA Turnpike 76, 471 miles, arriving home around 4:30 in the afternoon, covering a total of 12,409 miles in 44 days and covering 22 states. This was Vanlife Dream. Okay. The van behaved very well, had 2 oil changes during the trip, absolutely no mechanical problems, no accidents, no speeding tickets, fairly good weather, lots of wonderful photos and memories. I learned a lot about van life, and I could keep going. I was actually sad to return home. I mean, happy to see my family again, but I could have kept going on the road. I really think that this is a great way to travel. So that's my story, Van Life Vacation 2021.